and in the future in Africa as well. I think that we have an amazing community that we can tap into to be the platform that's announcing or showcasing the impact that's achieved out of them.
It is not true that people stop pursuing dreams because they grow old. They grow old because they stop pursuing dreams.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage moderator Patrick Gaspard, president of the Open Society Foundations, and our distinguished panel.
Good morning. What a spark of inspiration by Concordia to open this summit and UNGA Week with a conversation with three principled and remarkable innovators who will lead us in a conversation, if I facilitate well, that will help to frame the strategic dialogues that will occur later on today, that will help us think about what we're doing at the intersection of policy and culture to improve outcomes for migrants, refugees, and receiving communities, how we're exploring issues of impact investment and its efficacy, and the kind of leadership that municipalities, that urban leaders can provide in order to drive national and indeed international conversations. So it's really exciting. I'm slightly embarrassed to be introduced as the head of my foundation without a proper introduction for these three leaders, but we will do that in very short order. There is no doubt that we are convened here at a time that can be defined as a moment of real crisis, a moment of real turbulence in the world, and what seems at times to be a growing empathy recession from one corner of our globe to the next. One can quite easily rehearse all that seems out of kilter in our world on the issue of refugees and migrants. I just arrived here after spending a number of days in Italy, meeting with NGOs, some of our partners who are doing terribly important and courageous work on behalf of refugees and migrants. And of course, it's a country where the Interior Minister takes as a point of pride the fact that he denied entry onto safe shores for migrants who were rescued in the Mediterranean. This morning, my foundation just launched litigation against the government of Hungary, where we've had to leave our operations behind because there is a government, a prime minister, that's promulgating a set of restrictive, regressive legislation that makes it absolutely illegal to support and advance the plight of migrants and refugees. And here, in this very country where we are convened, a country that is defined and shaped by the way one succeeding generation of immigrants after another have helped to shape outcomes and values. The current administration, the current occupant of the White House, has promoted a zero-tolerance policy that is brutally separating families at the borders, that is profoundly reducing the number of refugees that the United States is taking in, and is contributing to the global empathy recession that I just made mention of. However, despite all that I just described, this is a conversation that will be defined by a hopefulness, a sense of real aspiration, and will be led by individuals who are leaning firmly into the art of the possible. And much is possible as the pendulum swings back in our direction on these issues. We can lean into this wind, and we do so with two remarkable mayors and with a private sector leader who is really helping to redefine what good global citizenship ought to look like. So we have Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, Mayor Yvonne Aki Sawyer of Freetown, and Mr. Frank Justa of the Justa Family Foundation. Mayor Bottoms has been in office since January and is vigorously focused on addressing inequality and inclusion. She has a long history of public service in Atlanta, serving in a variety of municipal posts and various other local organizations. I won't go into an exhaustive biography of the mayor or any of our other speakers, but I'm certain that everyone here has noted her recent pronouncement about ICE in her city and a number of things that other things that she is doing to advance access to justice. Mayor Aki Sawyer was sworn in as mayor in just last May. She spent more than 2 decades serving Sierra Leone both locally and internationally through advocacy efforts, for example, campaigning against the trade of blood diamonds and working as director of planning a national Ebola response in 2014 during that epidemic. And we will have much more to say about her transnational roots as well and her work. Frank Justa is the CEO of Fior Group. He runs the Justa Family Foundation, and he is one of the most active philanthropists in supporting refugees. He's a partner of the Open Society Foundation and our work with the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative that was launched in Concordia in 2016. He soon will launch the Ascend Venture Fund in Greece to help employ refugees and migrants there and to support newcomers or entrepreneurs. So can we please get a rousing round of applause for everyone here? As we begin this terribly important conversation with everyone who's in this room, it's important to note who's not here and not participating this morning, and the reason why they're not participating. Late last night, you may have noted that the World Health Organization made a decision to withdraw from their participation at Concordia. They did so when it came to light that Philip Morris International from the tobacco industry will be participants here and co-sponsors of the work of this summit and will be participating in one of its forums. I'm certain that it was a difficult decision for the World Health Organization to take this step. I must tell you, having only just discovered this, that I, and I'm sure many others, stand in solidarity with their decision and with their conviction that when we have conversations, dialogues like this that are values-based and where leaders like these three are helping us to set our moral compasses, it's important that we do so in a way that is true and true to those values and deeply steeped in them. So I stand in solidarity with their conviction and with their decision. That being said, the reason why Concordia exists, the reason why we support Concordia, is precisely to advance the most complicated conversations, to make certain that we don't deepen our polarization, but that we instead interrogate our assumptions and find ways to move past, perhaps, some errors in judgment to better protect healthcare outcomes and justice outcomes for all. So I just thought it was incumbent upon me to note a controversy that sprang up overnight. So with that, let's begin this conversation. I want to turn first to our mayor from Atlanta, Georgia, the heartland of the civil rights movement, Mayor Bottoms. Madam Mayor, as I said at the start, we've all heard about the bold moves that you made last week, issuing an executive order preventing Atlanta from holding ICE detainees and transferring all locally housed detainees as soon as possible. Please tell us more about this decision, and if you would, please help us to understand how you are drawing from the energy, the history of the struggle for rights in your remarkable city and state to contextualize the current struggle that we find ourselves in.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. And you briefly shared my professional work, but above all else, I am a mother. And I have 4 children, and like so many of you, as I watch the horrors of family separation on national news, I had to ask myself, what can we do, one, and what role are we playing? In the city of Atlanta, we had a longstanding contract with ICE to house detainees in our city jail. That contract was worth about $7 million a year to the city because we were paid by the person daily. But certainly there's not a price tag that you can put on doing what is right. And so when we watched the family separation play out on television, I immediately convened our team of Welcoming Atlanta and our corrections staff to ask if I could receive assurances that we were not housing people who had been separated at the border, and I could not receive those assurances. So that began a series of conversations. I immediately signed an executive order that asked that we stop receiving new detainees until we could further explore the policy. At that time, we had about 200 detainees. This was in June of this year. In the interim, we convened a panel of experts and advisory committee, including people from the nonprofit bar, former detainees. We even had ICE in some of the meetings, and they began a series of meetings to make a recommendation. I can tell you that I was actually surprised by their recommendation because there are private facilities in Georgia. There have been some concerns that these facilities did not offer the standard of care. So I actually expected that the recommendation might be that we continue to house detainees, but to my surprise, the recommendation was that we permanently end this agreement, and that is what we did. In September, I signed an executive order to ask that all of the detainees be removed from our city jail, but through the partnership with people like Uber, Lutheran charities, Catholic charities, we are able to make sure that families who have been separated have access to visit their family members in other parts of the state, and also making sure that we are working with our nonprofit bar to provide services in these other areas.
Could I ask you, Madam Mayor, to step back from this moment and speak about the larger enterprise that you have of inclusion and integration in Atlanta, based on your history and the city's history, and how this decision that you made surfaces from that determination and that history?
Certainly, Atlanta is the birthplace of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So there is certainly a very long-standing calling upon leadership in Atlanta to be very sensitive to all issues related to human and civil rights. And this is something that really is in our DNA. And historically, Atlanta has had very difficult conversations and really taken an unconventional approach that really changed the trajectory, not just of our city, but our nation and our world. It's very unique in Atlanta in that we have a very active corporate community and nonprofit community and civil rights community that sits at the table together and works through issues. Even with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, our mayor at that time, Ivan Allen, a Southern mayor, went to testify before Congress with the support of the business community, and it really changed the world. And so it really is in keeping with that standard that we are called to do things differently in Atlanta. You don't always think about Atlanta as it relates to immigration policies and setting standards related to immigration, but we know that small movements often change the world. You look at what happened with the civil rights movement, you look at the fight for women's rights, you look at a small Tea Party in Boston. And so what we see in Atlanta is this is another opportunity in keeping with who we are as a city, really to effectuate policy across the world, and we see that it's already happening across our country. There are cities who have followed suit, also looking at their relationship with ICE and their policies related to ICE. We don't know what the final outcome will be, but we do know it's a conversation, and we do know that cities are making a difference.
I think that was an applause line. Thank you. Mayor Aki Sawyer, you've assumed office at a time of daunting demographic and environmental transformations that are taking place in your region of the world, changes that could, in the next decade, further drive the challenges of migration. You have demonstrated an unswerving dedication to take on these challenges of economy and of critical infrastructure. Indeed, you were inspired and compelled to run for mayor following a mudslide in your community that wiped out 3,000 homes. I wonder, Madam Mayor, if you could help us to understand your planned approach to these challenges of infrastructure, of climate change that could drive residents from your shores. But I also hope that as you respond to that question, given that you are serving in Freetown, but you have family in the UK, how you're thinking about those challenges in a way that takes up also the issue of partnership towards real integration with mayors in the UK and elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. But the point about deciding to serve, yes, absolutely, triggered because of the environmental and sanitation challenges that Freetown sees. My decision was made in May. The mudslide happened in August. So if anything, it spurred me on to move from being a technocrat, a professional, to, in 1 year, running for, contesting, and winning an election, and the following May being sworn in. The point you made about me living now in Freetown, my family living in the UK, really speaks to the fact that we live in a world, a global world, where these transnational allegiances are more and more common. I was born in Freetown in Sierra Leone. I spent the early part of my childhood in Ghana and in Canada, went back to Sierra Leone, finished university, did my master's in the UK, and then ended up staying there for the next 26 years. But throughout that time, always very involved and very engaged in the challenges of Sierra Leone. So what I learned from that, what I see from that, is an ability for people to be in two worlds at the same time, contributing to both, and us being able, from the West and from the developing world, get the best out of that. The impact, the approach you asked to dealing with very, very fundamental problems. So for most people in this room, Sierra Leone is probably a place you've never heard of. So let me give you a few statistics. We're a small country in West Africa, a population of 7 million. Freetown is a capital city. It has a population of 1,055,964. That was 3 years ago when the last census was done. But Freetown's population, through internal migration, is growing at the rate of 4.2% per annum. By 2028, if everything goes in the same pace, we're going to have a city of almost 2 million people living on 357 square kilometers of land. So we've got major internal challenges, but we've also got external challenges. Every year, about 5,000 young people from Sierra Leone will make that very dangerous journey trying to get to the West. Those journeys are being done, risking their lives in order to have a better life. As Mayor of Freetown, I'm committed to working with my city to ensure that they have a hope of a better life at home. So the way we're doing this is working very collaboratively through multi-sector groups, looking at 4 clusters. Resilience, because the environment remains a significant challenge for us. Human development, because if we don't really tap into opportunities for these young people, they'll continue to put their lives at risk. Healthy cities, because we need to address fundamental challenges around sanitation, health, housing, and water. And finally, urban mobility, because as you would know in New York, if a city doesn't move, it doesn't work. So that's the approach that we're taking, collaboration, working with the people who are most at risk, taking on what is a huge challenge, but confident that we can actually, through collaborations and some of the things we'll be talking about today, make that difference. We're calling it, our 4-year plan is the Freetown City Transformation Plan. Most people think I'm crazy. Our hashtag is #TransformFreetown. In 4 years, we're looking to change the story of our city.
Sorry. The enormity of the challenges, if anything, in Freetown are almost understated. When one recognizes that at the point of independence, Freetown was organized to be able to accommodate about 400,000 residents, and now you're tipping over 2 million. So much attention is paid to the migration crisis, the refugee crisis in Europe. But you and I know that the overwhelming vast majority of Freetown residents, citizens of Sierra Leone and others in the region who leave your borders migrate to other African countries, not to Europe. The overwhelming majority, I think somewhere in the order of around 80%. And I wonder if you might be able to speak briefly about the partnerships that you're developing on the continent through the AU or other structures that exist for partnership between mayors in major centers.
The point you make, it's one of sequence as opposed to one of intention. So you'll find that a lot of the migration, yes, ends in Africa, but very often the intention is still to go to the West. That said, the need for partnerships can't be understated. You mentioned that I was sworn in May, so that's 4 months, so give me some time. We are very conscious of the need for mayors to collaborate. There are increasingly more and more forums in which to do that. In July, I was with all the mayors of the capital cities of Africa, in Shwani in South Africa. This is coming onto the agenda much more deliberately. The issues that we look at have to continue to be the same. How do we, on our side of the pond, our side of the Atlantic or the Mediterranean, how do we ensure that the people who are making these journeys, and as I say, the reason I'm making the point is, let me tell you the story of Yunusa. Yunusa is a young man, he's about 35, who last year took the journey. They call it Temple Run. It's named after a game, one of these sort of app games, and it's a very dangerous game. He took the Temple Run, left Freetown, went through Guinea, onto Mali, onto Niger, then Libya, all in the hope of getting to Italy. 3 months later, so many of his compatriots were dead. He'd been beaten, tortured, very close to losing his life. He was rescued by IOM and repatriated back to Freetown. He was in my office last week, and we were talking about his experience. And all along the journey, as you say, he was in another African country. African countries have to work together to solve this crisis. He was one of many, and he explained to me as they moved by taxi, by bus, by road, country to country, their numbers swelled. Ultimately, it was a dead end for him. He came back, and I asked, would you do it again? Knowing that many people do try again. And he said, no, Mayor. He said, I'm a father of 3 children. I don't want to risk my life. What I went through, I don't want to face again. But I need jobs. I need hope. And that's where we, on our side of the continent, have to put our focus. How do we work with the private sector? How do we work amongst ourselves to really address the economic challenges which are the driver for these journeys?
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor, for just, thank you. Thank you for an exceptionally thoughtful response, and thank you for your expertise in facilitation, because your response about the private sector gives me the perfect segue to Mr. Justa. Frank, I opened today by making reference to the empathy deficit that we're encountering in the world. When you talk about the plight of migrants and refugees, you are fond of saying over and over again that they're just like us, which of course contravenes the message of elected authoritarians, the emerging populists. And I wonder if you could just share with all of us here how your philosophy of They're Just Like Us colors your philanthropy, how you first started to become involved, and what you're doing to inspire and motivate others in the private sector to lean in with you.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Well, I think I'm here to advocate for private sector solutions to a lot of the issues that face the world today, and I've been involved in various forms of initiatives throughout the world and in many different areas, including poverty alleviation, the refugee issues, conflict resolution, homelessness, disaster relief efforts. And I always find, to answer your first question, I always find that it's really interesting that unless you have a face-to-face encounter with someone that's suffering, whether it's poverty or a refugee, you really won't be able to relate to the human side of the issue. And it's only when you go there, as I have with refugees, as I've gone to many different countries on the poverty alleviation stuff, that you come to that very simple realization that we're all the same. These are all human beings, and you tend to feel differently about your role in trying to make something work in their favor. And I've done lots of things, including bringing plane loads of people to various areas to give them a first-hand look and they always come back feeling much the same way as I do. And it's sad that it takes that to really make us understand that we all have a role to play in solving some of these issues. My foundation is guided by a simple principle of get things done, just fix problems. And it's very much a business approach to looking at all problems. And we talk about partnerships. Partnerships are really important to us because most complex problems you cannot solve on your own. You need to bring in other like-minded people that add value in specific areas of that problem. And a great example, you being mayors, we had a homelessness problem in Vancouver, a very serious one, some 10, 15 years ago. And, people tried to fix it from different angles on their own, doing different things, but never in a coordinated fashion. So we created a foundation, Street to Home Foundation, which brought together the city government, the provincial government, the private sector, the business community, and a lot of the nonprofit groups that had an interest in that area. We created a plan. We researched it for a year. We wrote a business plan for a year. And then we implemented a 10-year business plan that had everybody working towards a common goal, and it worked. And that gave me the first clue that partnerships are really important. I think entrepreneurship is important to treat problems like any entrepreneur would treat a problem. We had a situation in Greece during the height of the refugee crisis when a lot of the migrants and refugees were huddled at the border of Macedonia in a place called Idomeni, and they were living in horrible conditions. It was an informal settlement. There were 10,000, 12,000 people there. And there were not enough camps to send them to government camps. So we thought, well, how can we fix this? So we thought, we acquired an old abandoned textile factory. We did a deal with the Greek migration people, and using volunteers and our own money, we renovated this facility using input from the refugees themselves as to the type of conditions they wanted to live in, and we had it done within 2 months, all through volunteer work. It was fast, it was efficient. We put in all the same services that you would otherwise get from the international aid organizations who were not present for a lot of reasons. And we used local groups to implement things like, security, food services, medical services, education. And we created a mini facility there that housed initially 300 people. We had built it for 800, but as time went on, I think we almost embarrassed the Greek government into putting us out of business, and they placed a lot of those people in apartments and other places. Innovation, I think innovation, again, another business term. The Ascend Collaborative, which we launched in Athens last year, we recognized that local nonprofit groups had a better understanding of the landscape of how to deal with migrants and refugees then did the international organizations. So, and they normally get less than 2% of all the international aid money. So we thought, well, let's put together a collaborative. We did it with the Libra Group and with Coca-Cola and IKEA and my foundation. And we basically funded them to do the work. And they were much more efficient. They knew the landscape. They knew the bureaucracy. They understood the Greek way of doing things. And it's been very, very successful. It was just, you know, and again, it was innovating something. How do you fix a problem when, you know, the traditional ways of doing it are not being employed? Being opportunistic. I think we had a recent situation in Canada, which is where I'm from, where there were a number of slots available for this blended program to bring in pre-screened refugees, whereby the costs of bringing them in are shared between the private sector, Community Groups, Individuals Act, and government. And there were a number of slots that were about to expire in 2018, and if they expired, they could not be pushed forward into the next year. So we were told this in August. Within a week, we were mobilized, and we put together a fund, myself and Ed Shapiro and a fellow named Jim Estell here. Ed Shapiro's from Boston, the other two of us are from Canada. And we basically have placed several hundred families already by matching those sponsor groups that were available but didn't have the funding, and the refugees. And again, you had to move very quickly. It was opportunistic. It's the same way you would take care of a problem in business. So all of these things are business type approaches to solving problems. And I've been doing this for a very long time. It's my entire life now. And I stay awake at nights thinking, okay, how do we, we're presented with a problem, how do we fix it? And I can tell you, and for people that are in the room that come from the private sector that are trying to find a way to be involved in issues like the refugee issue, there are ways of doing it. And just, you have to work with other groups, you have to work with partners, and you have to use a business mentality.
Well, that's fantastic and just incredible set of investments that have clearly been effective. But since you used the word opportunistic a number of times, I wonder if I might not put you on the spot here, Frank. As we're coming on stage, you said, let's mix this up a little and have a little bit of fun. So let's do that right now. So because you're opportunistic and because you appreciate some of the challenges that the mayor of Freetown is taking up and some of the direction being taken in Atlanta, I wonder if you might be able to speak succinctly about what opportunities might exist for partnership between your foundation, your company, and your efforts, and Freetown and Atlanta, given what they're trying to accomplish in the world.
Wow, you're beautiful.
I like this guy.
We have
nicely
witnesses.
Nicely done. Thank God we only have 3 minutes left. No, I think, listen, if I understand your problem, you've got people are migrating to the city, and it's happening very quickly. And I would imagine one of the biggest problems is job creation. How do you, when people come in, you have to integrate them into that city, and that requires jobs. And one of the things that we do very well, and we do it, I started with Bill Clinton as the Clinton-Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative. It was to address poverty by creating sustainable jobs with good incomes. And we did that through creating social enterprises that were meant to create jobs. And we've done it in parts of Africa, and we've done it mostly throughout Latin America and in Indonesia. And you should look it up. It's called Elevate, and invite us over to free.
You're invited.
Thank you.
So our focus in job creation is hospitality, it's housing, and it's the green sector. So you're very, very welcome. We'll take it up after.
Hospitality is something we know about. We created a training school in Cartagena, Colombia, to train the hospitality industry.
Excellent.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm taking notes.
There it is.
So,
My people are going to kill me, by the way.
but you've committed
just
to a room full of 400 people. There's no going back now.
And you're right, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to very quickly go through a round robin here with those on stage. So, first, the mayor of Atlanta. You have played a critical role in the Welcoming Cities gathering. You're playing a role in the Global Compact work that culminates at the end of the year in Marrakesh. Can you help us understand why it's so important for Atlanta not just to maintain its gaze on work in Atlanta and in Georgia, but to really step into these issues in a way that demonstrates that you're a global city? How does Atlanta benefit from that?
I'm sorry.
How does Atlanta benefit from that?
Well, you know, when you think about our country and you think about our various stories to get here, we really are a group of people who make up the entire world. By that I mean I recently had an opportunity to do a DNA test, and not 1 ounce of Native American DNA showed up on my testing kit. What I saw was Cameroon, I saw the Philippines, I saw European Jewish, I saw Ivory Ghana Coast, and even with our Office of Immigrant Affairs, the head of our office shared with me that her father came to Georgia as an unaccompanied minor because of persecution because he was Jewish. There was another young woman who shared that she came to America as an undocumented minor. So I share these stories with you because it matters, because we are people with various stories, and when you look at Atlanta and you look at it as this international city, we cannot be cognizant of what makes us such a great city. We can't ignore what makes us such a great city. And so we are better for the work that we are doing through our Office of Immigrant Affairs because it's in our DNA, literally. It's in our DNA. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport brings millions of people through our city a year. And if we aren't being responsible and living up to the legacy that we have as a welcoming and inclusive city, then we really have failed.
Thank you so much. Mayor Aki Sawyer, we heard about some of the challenges that exist in Freetown, and as someone who has served in South Africa, I'm aware that there's far too much representation of what's not going right. Can you give us a sense of things that are going well with the next generation in Freetown, in Sierra Leone, around these sets of issues that we raised today that you think ought to be replicated in other parts of the world?
We've got, surprisingly, in the midst of all of the challenges I've just mentioned, we actually, so our framework for transformation is, the sort of strapline is inclusive, underpinned by innovation, data-driven, and strong performance management. And within our work, the cluster of human development is where we do our skills development and job creation. And I've been amazed because, like you, this question of bringing everyone together, we have these sector working groups which comprise private sector, government, as in the national government, us, the city, local government, and community stakeholders, as well as the NGOs. I've been really blown away by the level of creativity and innovation that I see among our young people. Yes, of course, there are many who are underprivileged, don't have options, are looking for jobs, but there are those who are creating their own jobs. I met recently with a young lady, she's never been to university, she designed a solar windmill. And we're actually going to have that light up the main police station in the city, just to engage and show what others can do. You have young people who are designing plastics recycling, creating paving stones out of that to use on community roads. In the midst of the challenges, there are sparks of hope. And our job is to fan those sparks so that they become fires and they catch among other young people. For that to happen, we need platforms, we need collaboration, we need structures. But the good news is there are great things happening. And those things will continue to happen if we, as the local government, as the city government, with our partners, get behind them.
That's inspired. I think I'm going to come to Freetown soon.
You're welcome.
Frank, I want you to close this out as briefly as you can. When I started, I mentioned the controversy that stirred overnight around WHO's participation and the participation of Philip Morris. As someone who comes from the private sector, who forms these kinds of partnerships, I'm sure that you've encountered difficulties, challenges, controversies around them. And I wonder what you might say to private sector potential allies who may be intimidated by the challenge of partnering effectively in a transparent way with the public sector in light of some of these challenges. We just have a little bit of time.
Yeah, I'll just
send us out with a real charge.
I subscribe to the belief, friend or foe, take their dough. Listen, to judge other people's motives is almost a waste of time. The recipients of any good works is just happy to have somebody that's interested in helping. And I just believe that we all, as a global community, have a responsibility to do everything we can to solve some of these social issues, and it doesn't matter what we did in the past. Who are we to judge? And I subscribe to just get the job done and forget about the politics.
Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you to these three phenomenal public servants.
Ladies and gentlemen,